You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. Today is May 19th, 2024, and this is episode 278 of Lighthearted. Our subject today is the oldest standing lighthouse in the United States, Sandy Hook in New Jersey. I am actually recording this on May 14th in room 204 at the Comfort Inn Recording Studios in Baltimore, Maryland. In case you can hear traffic outside, it is rush hour right now here in Baltimore. I'm on the 7th day of an 11th day trip down the coast. I've already recorded 8 interviews, having a great time. So let's get right to today's interview. The long spit of land known as Sandy Hook juts out from the Navesink Highlands on the approach to New York Harbor. The lighthouse that stands at the end of Sandy Hook began service in 1764, making it the oldest standing lighthouse tower in the United States. The octagonal rubble stone tower stands 103 feet tall. In the early days of the American Revolution, the lighting apparatus was removed in case the lighthouse fell into the hands of the British. A few months later, the British forces got the light back into working order. American forces bombarded the tower with cannon fire, but it withstood the attack and remained under British control for most of the war. The light remains active with the Fresnel lens still in place. Ownership was transferred to the National Park Service in 1996, and the lighthouse is now part of the Gateway National Recreation Area. The tower is open seasonally, and there's a visitor center in the former Keeper's House. In 1964, Sandy Hook became one of the small number of lighthouses to be designated a National Historic Landmark. Tom Hoffman, our guest today, is the historian for the Gateway National Recreation Area. He has been associated with the park for an amazing 50 years. He's also the author of the book, Fort Hancock, published by Arcadia Publishing. Let's listen to my conversation with Tom Hoffman now. I am here today at the Sandy Hook Lighthouse, one of the most historic lighthouses in the United States. My first time here in about 17 years, so it's very exciting to be back. And with me is Tom Hoffman, the historian for the Gateway National Recreation Area. Thank you so much, Tom, for doing the podcast and for hosting me here today. I appreciate it.
Jeremy, it's really quite an honor and privilege to be with you to do this, so I'm really happy you're here today.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks again. So let me start. Obviously, I want to talk about the history of the lighthouse, but let's start with you a little bit.
Okay.
How did you get so interested in history? And I think this was in maybe a YouTube video I saw or something. You talked a bit about how the Civil War kind of played a role in that.
It sure did. I was just 2 months shy of being 6 years old. My father always read newspapers, and I have to really thank him and my mother. They liked history, especially my dad. And he always read newspapers. And one day as a little boy, August 1956, he shows me the front page news, the last Union Civil War veteran passed away in Duluth, Minnesota, August of 1956. Said he was 109 years old, and his name was Albert Wilson. And I didn't understand what that was all about. I didn't understand. I was too young for the Civil War. My father explained it to me. A little later on, the next year, in the fall of 1957, I was bored to tears because it was a rainy, cold day, and I couldn't go out to play. So I go up in the attic. I find this cardboard box of books. It's my father's college books, and there was a small one, hardcover, red, and it was entitled Gettysburg, and it was by W.W. Stork. He was the chief of the guides. You could hire a guide and go around, and the guide will tell you everything about the battle. So I opened this book. I'm still not into reading yet, but I was fascinated by the pictures. It's like, to me, the pictures were Civil War soldiers, monuments, Civil War cannons. I took that book to my dad, and I said, Dad, where is this place? What is this about? He explained the big battle, and I was still trying to grasp everything. And he said that before the Civil War, there was the American Revolution, where we fought to be a new country free from English rule, and we fought a revolution. And he said, right up here in Morristown, and I knew George Washington. He said, well, he was the general in charge of the 10,000-man army. They encamped for 2 winters up at Morristown, and he said they suffered more there than they did at Valley Forge. Of course, Valley Forge, they suffered, but they actually suffered a lot more at Morristown. He says, do you want to go to these places? Morristown's here in New Jersey, and Gettysburg is over there in Pennsylvania. You want to go to these places? And one word, yeah. And ever since, and we went to both places. Spring of 1958 is Morristown, and then August, when he took his vacation, my parents and I were at Gettysburg, and I'll tell you, I've been hooked on history ever since I was a little boy because of those visits.
Mm-hmm.
So I have my parents to thank.
Yeah, well, that's great. And by the way, I was born in July 56, so I didn't know that. It's interesting to know that the last Civil War veteran died within a month after I was born.
Yeah, and I was only not quite 6 years old when Albert Wilson passed away. As it turned out, you're right, he was the very last Civil War veteran. Because there were some old people who claimed they were Confederates, and they were young boys in the Civil War. So it's been proven.
Well, that's really interesting.
So isn't it interesting? In our lifetime.
Yeah. Well, you learn something every day.
Yes.
So I understand your association with Sandy Hook and the Gateway National Recreation Area goes back about 50 years. And that you were actually the first volunteer in the park. Do I have that right?
Yes, because Congress was debating creating Gateway National Recreation Area, which includes a lot of the New York side of Lower New York Harbor, Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens, and Congress was throwing in Sandy Hook, and most of Sandy Hook would become Sandy Hook Unit Gateway National Recreation Area, but they debated it for like 4 years, and those were my college years, and so I was well versed in seeing it being created. And it was created by Act of Congress, October 1972. But the first year of the actual operation, the physical operation, was the beginning of 1974. And before that, the Army was owner of all of Sandy Hook Peninsula. But in 1962, they leased the south 2 miles to the state government of New Jersey. And that was Sandy Hook State Park. And that became the most visited, back then in the 60s, early 70s, the most visited state park in the New Jersey State Park system. So they closed it down at the end of 1973, and the new sign went up with an arrowhead saying it's a national park, part of Gateway National Recreation Area. So I come down with my dad, and we went into the park headquarters building, which was down at the south end. It's still there. And I walked in and I said, I hear you're still trying to hire people to work here in the summer. And the ranger on duty said, well, we're trying to find lifeguards. It's kind of familiar because they still have problems in New Jersey and New York, Long Island, hiring enough lifeguards to guard the beaches. And here, this is way back 50 years ago, he says, we're just trying to find enough lifeguards. And I said, well, I want to give tours. I like history. I can tell people the history of Sandy Hook. And he said, well, what we could do is you could work for us for free as a volunteer in park. VIP is what the Park Service calls it. I knew about that. And I said, well, I will sign up. And that's how I became the first VIP at Sandy Hook. And then fast forward to my first day of actually coming on duty as a volunteer was May 25th, 1974. And I worked through the summer to about May 25th or 26th. 1974 as a park volunteer. So that's the beginning of my association, because I just wanted to be here. I found it so fascinating, both the natural history and especially the history of people. The cultural history here is fantastic. I just decided I'm going to stay here. This place makes me happy.
Yeah.
So I'm still here, and it's hard to believe. It's 50 years now, this year, as a volunteer in park. And then the next year, they used to have winter seasonals. A seasonal could work here during the summer months. And the man who was in charge, he said, "When can you start working here?" And I said, "As soon as you want me to." So we picked February 2nd, which is Groundhog Day. And that was my first full day as a paid National Park seasonal ranger. And ironically, like today, Jeremy, I'm the only one, because the way the schedule works, I'm the only one on my staff to be working today. The first day I worked, February 2nd, the way the schedule worked, there was only a few people that were working, but they were all off that day. And I ran the visitor center all by myself. So history repeats itself, as you can see. It keeps repeating itself.
Yeah. Well, you kind of carved a niche for yourself.
Yeah.
here.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to stay here because I always find something new about the history of Sandy Hook.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on your 50th anniversary.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hope you're doing something special to celebrate, maybe?
Maybe.
Well, you should. So let's segue into the history of Sandy Hook Lighthouse. Of course, it's our listeners, I'm sure, most of them should know, if they don't know, that it is the oldest standing lighthouse in the United States, Lighthouse Tower.
Yep.
People get confused with Boston Light, first light station.
Right.
But the first lighthouse destroyed by the British in the Revolution. So this is the oldest standing lighthouse. Why was a lighthouse needed here in 1764?
Well, thanks to all the English merchants up in New York City, in Manhattan, they started to lose their cargo ships. And cargo ships were worth a lot of money. The crew that sails them, they're worth a lot of money. Passengers pay to come over to this country. There's no airplane, so you come by ship. So, and cargo. These were basically cargo ships. So you're going to lose your cargo. Everything, you're losing money. So that's why 43 prominent merchants signed a petition and handed it to the royal governor up there in New York City and said, "We want permission to build a lighthouse down at Sandy Hook," which is technically in the colony of East New Jersey. But the royal governor of New York says, "Sure, fine, go ahead, as long as you pay for it." So they raised the money via lottery. That was to buy 4 acres near the tip of Sandy Hook, and then upon it build a stone lighthouse tower with a little small wooden building next to it for the first keeper. And so they're about halfway done. They probably started, they brought the 4 acres in May of 1762, and then shortly thereafter they hire Isaac Conroe, who today, if Isaac were living today, he would be called a building contractor. And he lived in Lower Manhattan, where all these merchants and the royal governor were, and he was hired to build the lighthouse and the keeper's house. But they ran out of money. In 1763, they had to have a second lottery that raised enough money to finish the building of a stone tower and that keeper's house. And it went into operation thanks to the New York Mercury newspaper. June 18th, 1764, said that last Monday, the New York Lighthouse was lighted for the first time, because that's what everybody's calling it. New York Interest built it, so it's standing in New Jersey, but they called it the New York Lighthouse. And it was lighted last Monday. Well, when you're reading the issue of June 18th, that means June 11th, 1764 is the night this was lighted for the first time. And it's been a lighthouse ever since.
So Isaac Conroe was the builder. Do we know anything interesting about the actual construction of the lighthouse?
No, apparently, well, I do know that Isaac was born, he was an English Quaker. He was born in Burlington County. Well, today I think they call it Burlington City in Burlington County. And then he migrated, found his niche here in building buildings or whatever you needed to build, or if you're going to build your own building, he was the Home Depot of his day. I like his little ad in the New York Mercury newspaper. He said, "If you don't want me to build anything, you can buy all the construction materials from me. I'll gladly sell you all the things you need." So he's the one who comes down, builds the lighthouse, goes on, and I know that by 1771 he's passed away. And I've checked, I've Googled all the old cemeteries. I can't find his name listed on any of the old New York City cemeteries. And my guess is he was taken back to Burlington, New Jersey to be buried. And that's more research I have to do on my end.
Yeah.
But his notes, practically everything, if he did any drawings, I'm sure he did. When he died, I'm afraid it just got lost to history because nobody's really uncovered anything that he drew or wrote about the lighthouse.
Yeah. Well, that's too bad, but not really surprising. There's not a whole lot of that type of thing that survives from anyone.
Because it was too long after his death that the New York Historical Society was founded for that purpose. Start preserving the old documents and artifacts and things at the building that's still up there today. But nobody was around when Isaac Conroe passed away, and who knows, maybe all his possessions were thrown away or sold at auction. Yeah. And the worst thing, too, is fires. And New York City had two big ones. They had the one back during the American Revolution, and the British took over the city. There was a big fire that burned down a lot of Lower Manhattan, and there was another big fire that followed again in Lower Manhattan in the 1830s. Who knows, if anything was saved from Isaac Conroe, it could have disappeared in two big fires then.
Right, that's true too. So you just mentioned a little bit about what happened in New York City during the Revolution, but what happened here at Sandy Hook during the Revolution?
Well, I'm going to have to make this real short because a number of things happened here in the Revolution. But concerning the Sandy Hook Lighthouse, several times, like the local militia or in a famous raid, which was conducted during the night of June 21st, 1776, Colonel Benjamin Tupper comes down from New York City with at least 200 soldiers, Continental Army soldiers, with two 6-pounder cannons. They land more towards the south end of the Hook, and they march up the Hook and get within sight of Sandy Hook Lighthouse. And Tupper goes ahead of his men, and he's then challenged by the British Armed Guard is here, because 2 British frigates got here first, anchored, and sent British sailors and probably Marines to guard the light, knowing full well that the new Continental Army was going to try to destroy the Sandy Hook Lighthouse, because that's exactly what they did twice up at Boston Lighthouse. And by the way, of the 2 raids led up there, Benjamin Tupper led one of the raids to try to destroy the lighthouse. So here he is again trying to destroy it, and he wrote a good letter that is preserved, and in the letters to General George Washington from and to him, you can quote Benjamin Tupper saying to General Washington, "We bombarded the tower for over an hour, but could make no impression upon its walls," because 6-pounder cannonballs were not big enough to destroy the stone tower. Yeah. I mean, that was built to last. Yeah. So he's telling George all about this. George answers back, well, because of the danger involved. You had 2 British frigates firing their cannons at you. You had all those British sailors and Marines firing from the land at you, and you're lucky you didn't lose anybody. He says, please cease all endeavors, further endeavors in attacking the lighthouse. So call it a day.
Huh. Are there any signs of cannonballs hitting the lighthouse?
No, but what's interesting is Mr. George Houghton was a magazine article writer back in the 1870s. He wrote a terrific article for Scribner's Monthly Magazine. There's plenty of writers writing for plenty of magazines back in all through the 1800s. Yep. George Houghton actually comes down here and visits with a couple of artists. The artists do sketches to illustrate his article, but George comes upon, when he comes to the Sandy Hook Lighthouse, Charles W. Patterson is the lighthouse keeper here. And Charles started here in 1861. He will resign as keeper due to ill health in 1885. But when Houghton is here, Charles Patterson tells Houghton that in the summer of 1863, the government completely renovated the tower, and he said the marks, in his article, he says, the marks of cannonballs were plainly visible until the renovation.
Oh, okay.
And you can't see them. We had a contractor renovate the lighthouse, needed a good renovation, And so the Park Service hired a contractor who renovated it and took off a lot of the peeling paint. And for the first time, I was actually able to see the bare stones without paint on them. Most looked to be rough granite, and here and there you could see a dark brown stone, and that stone would be the native limonite, which is a low-grade iron ore which was mined all around New Jersey in the iron mining days, when iron mining would make you a profit. And so I'm looking at the lighthouse for the first time with a lot of the paint removed, and I could see the brown stones were limonite, but most of it is granite. But I'm looking for marks of cannonballs, and I really couldn't see anything. So, but thanks to this man, George Houghton, speaking to Charles Patterson, mentioning that little fact, and also the fact that they renovated the whole interior. So when you walk in, and we'll go over there later, open the door and you'll see bricks lining the interior. Yeah. Well, those bricks were all put in to add reinforcement or thickness to the original stone wall with red bricks and a new iron spiral, round, spiral staircase to take you to the top of the tower. Mm-hmm. So it's 1863 vintage, which you're seeing then. We're not going to see a 1764 interior.
Sure. Originally wooden stairs, probably?
Yes, they had. You come in, there was a stone floor, and then you see a set of wooden steps, either left or right, and just above the first two window wells would have been the first floor, which was wood. You get up there, then there's another set of steps. So you made your way up, and it would be nice to find a drawing. And I'm sure Isaac Conrad had to do that for his workers, to follow a guide. But he was probably here most of the time anyway, and tell them how to build everything.
You mentioned Keeper Patterson a few minutes ago. There were lots of lighthouse keepers at Sandy Hook over the years. I think there was a principal keeper and two assistants for some time.
And that's an interesting story because it involved Twin Lights. And a lighthouse inspector came here. I think it was the early 1850s. He inspects both lighthouses, but he makes note in his inspection report of Sandy Hook, gee whiz, you have one keeper here. He's not only taking care of the main light, and that's how the government always referred to Sandy Hook Lighthouse, as main light Sandy Hook. He also, the keeper, has to run over to the bayside and take care of a small wooden beacon lighthouse. Yeah. And then run way out to the growing tip of Sandy Hook. As the ocean waves brought more sand, it grew further and further out, and he's got to get up to the North Hook beacon and light that one. You have one guy running this triangular pattern down here. He says, and meanwhile, up at the Neversink lights,
never sink, they used to say, right?
Never sunk or never sink. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. The way they pronounced it in the old days.
Neversink, yeah.
Neversink. And he says they got 5 keepers up there, and they could easily take care of both tower lights. And he said, I recommend that the keeper here get at least 1, possibly 2 assistants. And that's what they actually did. And I have done research a number of times at the National Archives. And I found out, finding the old logbooks of when they appointed the appointment books for keepers, they hired in, I think it was 1857, a woman's name is listed as an assistant keeper, but she didn't last long. Mm-hmm. She is appointed. In my extensive notes in my office, I've got her name. I can't remember it offhand, but they did hire an early lady, lighthouse assistant keeper. Yeah. But when they hired Charles W. Patterson, his sister will be appointed the first assistant keeper in 1867, and 2 years later, a man is appointed second assistant keeper, and that's Samuel Jewell. Okay. So at least Charles had his married sister. She was married, and she lived with her brother Charles right here next to the lighthouse for many years. And then when he resigned due to ill health, she also didn't want to stay here without Charles, so she resigned. But it will be Samuel who will be a temporary keeper, But then is a few years later is said, well, the government says, you are the head keeper. And he was given another assistant.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, yeah. In the early days, this must have been a pretty isolated place out
Yeah,
here.
you can imagine the colonial days when this was it. A lighthouse with a little wooden keeper's house next door. And maybe not on the property of the lighthouse, but the Sandy Hook pilots loved to hang out here. Pilots would go out, tell the ship's captain, if you give me some money, I'll get you safely to New York City or Perth, wherever you want to go, but for money. And they loved to, waiting for ships to arrive, looking out for them. You know what they're doing. They are drinking. They are drinking and eating, hanging out. But I don't think at the lighthouse. I think it's further south, away from the lighthouse. Because even in colonial days, they had a rule. You don't drink on the property of the lighthouse here. And with the federal government said, you do not drink liquor, anything with alcohol in it, on the property of the lighthouse.
Yeah, I won't say any more about that.
But of the two longest serving lighthouse keepers, it's Charles W. Patterson, and it turns out to be Sam Jewell, because as I've done more and more research, he's appointed the second assistant keeper sometime in 1869. He will last 40 years.
Wow.
He will see the age of sail basically end, and the ships now will become steam-powered ships. So he sees that age end and the new dawning of the steamship age.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. He saw a lot of evolution of
yes,
things around
he did.
here. Yeah. So anything before we move on to other subjects? Anything else about the human history here that springs to mind? That
Jeremy, we could do a program about that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, because I found a number of interesting stories for Sam Jewell. A good one is the Army built the first concrete mortar battery to defend an American harbor here in the early 1890s. They put in 16 12-inch caliber breech-loading mortars, meaning the projectile's diameter was 12-inch. The projectile would be 4 foot long, and you load it from the breech. This is a brand new thing for harbor defense in America. And so he's told, as being the keeper, you go up to the top, and we have to start test firing each of the 16 mortars. So we're going to start firing the first mortar. You tell us back down on the ground if it's damaging your plate glass windows of the lantern house or damaging the frame lens, which is all made of glass in a brass frame. So imagine him going up there and the first boom of a 12-inch high-powered cannon firing a projectile for test firing is fired. And luckily, this did not, the concussion, the shock wave of all these cannons being test fired one by one didn't come over and break the glass of the windows or break the glass of the frame lens.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how nervous he was with the first mortar going off to the last mortar going off, but no damage. So there's many stories. Fortunately, he told some of his stories that he felt were the most important to a newspaper reporter. You find the old newspapers when you do research, and you copy it all down.
Oh, that's great.
So, could never meet the man because he died way back in 1913, I believe. And he was in his early 60s, too. I thought he'd be in good shape by walking constantly up and down the lighthouse for all those years. Guess what? That ruined his health. It gave him a heart condition, especially when the government introduced a new type of lamp to burn up there. It kept going off on him. He complained to a reporter, at least 5 or 6 times, I'm running up and down the tower an hour to keep the light on.
Yeah, that's healthy to a point.
To a point, yeah. So he had to resign in 1909, and I believe it's 1913 when he passed away from a heart condition.
Yeah. I know there's a lot more you talk about with the human history. Maybe we'll do a part 2 sometime, but...
Be glad to do it.
You mentioned earlier the other lights that were out here at Sandy Hook and that the keepers had to take care of those as well. If we could just touch on that a little bit again, can you tell me a little bit about those other lights? And didn't one of them get moved and is actually quite well known in a different location at this point?
Yes, you're right. To this day, people come out, they want to see the Sandy Hook Lighthouse because it's here. But they don't know that to guide ships from the west of Sandy Hook, now these would be ships coming from Perth Amboy, New Jersey, and that's a good 15 miles to the west of us, come across New York Harbor, and they would want to see a light. Well, they're definitely to see the Sandy Hook Lighthouse on. But right next to the water is what would eventually be called the West Beacon, because it's facing west, and ships coming from Perth Amboy towards Sandy Hook are going to see a wooden beacon. It's about 35 foot tall, and it's made of wood, but at the top is a fourth order Fresnel, and they're going to see that. And what you want to do, if you're not sure where the Deepwater Channel is coming from Perth Amboy over to Sandy Hook, you line up your ship with the West Beacon at the bayside with the Sandy Hook Lighthouse, which is taller. And if they're not lined up together, you're not in deep water. So you line up your ship, and that tells you you've ranged your ship into deep water. You are now in a deep water channel. So you're now safe. But that's why they call them pairs of lighthouses working together, range lights. Yeah. And that's what we had. And people don't know that. I can show you the patch of ground, the exact spot where the West Beacon stood. But I do believe it was 1930 when they changed the shape of that channel coming over here to the tip of the hook. And so they decided, the U.S. Lighthouse Service decided to demolish it. Mm-hmm. The other one was the North Hook Beacon. And the last of the North Hook beacons, the last one was iron. It was made of iron plates bolted together, again with a fourth order Fresnel lens at the top. And this would tell the ships at night that the tip of the hook had grown further away from the Sandy Hook Lighthouse and much further out from the lighthouse. So they marked it with a beacon to mark the north tip end. And so ships would know, don't turn as soon as you see the Sandy Hook light on, you're going to run into Sandy Hook and get shipwrecked. You have to go around the North Hook Beacon to get into New York Harbor and then sail to the Narrows, Staten Island and Brooklyn, then to New York City. Mm-hmm. In World War I, the iron lighthouse here, the North Hook Beacon it's called then, ends up being out in front of a 6-inch gun battery that defends the harbor in wartime. So the Army says to the lighthousers, please move your lighthouse and the 2 keeper houses next to it and a small foghorn. Move that all out from in front of Battery Pick, because we now are in World War I. We joined the war in April 1917. With that, they disassemble it. They send all the iron plates to the big lighthouse depot, which is the National Lighthouse Museum now, over there in Staten Island, right almost next to the Staten Island ferryboat docks. And it's stored there until 1921, when the Lighthouse Service says, well, let's go re-erect this former North Hook Beacon, not down at the hook, but way up Manhattan on the west side. There's a rock ledge, and it's called Jeffrey's Hook, and it's a bunch of rocks that go out towards the Hudson River. Yeah. Let's re-erect it there. And of course, that's where they paint it red. And later on, a lady will write a popular children's book.
Hildegard Swift.
The Little Red Lighthouse and the Great Great Bridge. Yeah. And you know, when the Coast Guard said, I think this is after World War II, we don't need it anymore, we're going to demolish it, a letter writing campaign began with the children of New York City. They said, you can't destroy the Little Red Lighthouse. Thanks to that book, and the children of New York City, they wrote so many letters to the Coast Guard that then the Coast Guard turns to the city of New York, and they say, well, transfer it to the city of New York, and the city parks department not only maintains it, but they actually restored it not too long ago. They put a fourth order Fresnel up in it. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, It's on the cover of the book I did on Hudson River and New York Harbor.
Right,
lights.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I can't say I added to its popularity or anything like that. That was already established.
Yeah.
You have a beautiful third-order Fresnel lens in Sandy Hook Lighthouse installed in 1856. It's pretty amazing. It's still in use.
Yeah.
It's been in use since 1856. Is
Yeah.
that correct?
Well, I couldn't wait to meet you.
Okay.
Because, again, I've been doing a lot of research over the years
Yeah.
on the Sandy Hook Lighthouse to be as accurate as possible. I found a government reference. You remember the annual reports of the old Lighthouse Service, or the Lighthouse Board, and then
yeah.
the Lighthouse Service.
Yeah.
Anyway, there is a one-sentence reference that the Fresnel lens is here, but is still not been assembled. And this one-sentence reference is dated from, I think, mid-December of 1856.
Okay.
So to me, I feel that they put that lantern house up there, or the lens house up there. They put a new one up there in 1856, but the lens is still crated, and they have to take all the glass prisms and the brass frame and then rebuild it. And I think some of there were two French companies that made the Fresnels in France. And I read somewhere where some of the workmen would come over and actually do the work of assembling all those glass prisms into the brass frame. And that must have been done in January of 1857. So I always like to say, well, beginning in 1857, they assemble the lens and then it goes into. So I think it works like that. First, you need to protect it with the lantern house. So you build that first, and then it's laying here, but it's not assembled yet. And they quickly assembled it with the beginning of 1857. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, that's good to know. Again, you learn something every day,
Yeah.
and I'll be careful from now on. If everything you say sounds completely accurate. So
That's what I do. I try to find the oldest records possible that are reliable records.
yeah.
So that's what I found.
When people climb the lighthouse, they must be if they've never seen anything like that before, they must be very impressed by it, I would imagine.
Oh, going up the spiral staircase?
And seeing the lens up close.
Oh, and seeing that a lens that's been up there since, again, the beginning of 1857, still lighted today, and it's owned and operated by the Coast Guard. You know how the Coast Guard started a policy that they'll sell you at auction a lighthouse, but you, the new owner, have to maintain it. And you have to allow the aids to navigation team, if they still light it, they maintain the light too.
Yeah.
And you have to allow Coast Guard personnel in to check it periodically. So we got the lighthouse structure transferred to National Park Service ownership in 1996, but they still own the lens and the lighting system in it. And I would say maybe 3 months, every 6 months, an aids navigation team asks us if they can go in.
Yeah.
In the old days, we had to ask them for the key to go in.
Yeah. The lighthouse, as I understand it, was originally much closer to the water than it is now.
Yeah, the ocean waves made Sandy Hook. And we're talking about the waves. That is what people will tell you, that's the literal drift of the ocean, is the waves.
Right.
And here in New Jersey, that drifting pattern splits and goes two ways. It goes south, and the waves run towards Cape May from around the Manasquan Inlet, southward, but also go north from Manasquan to Sandy Hook. And the waves always are hitting the beaches, and when they're hitting the beaches, they're slowly carrying sand along the beaches. And this long peninsula is not only Sandy Hook, New Jersey, but it's also the town of Seabright, with the Shrewsbury River to the west and the Atlantic Ocean to the east. Also, Monmouth Beach is the same way. They've got the river to the west, they've got the ocean to the east. And the sands of all the beaches south of Long Branch and Long Branch the sands are gradually moved in the old days to make Monmouth Beach, to make Seabright, New Jersey, and finally add on a good 6.5, 7 miles of finally Sandy Hook.
Yeah.
It's all one long buried beach. That's why when they build a lighthouse in 1764, the ocean waves don't stop. They continue, and they are making a longer tip. They're adding more sand, and the tip grew from roughly 500 feet in 1764 all the way to, like, by the time you're to modern times, even the early 1900s, the tip is actually 1.5 miles. And it doesn't go farther because the Army Corps of Engineers always hires a dredge company to dredge the San Diego Channel right off the tip of the hook. So any sands that start going into the channel, San Diego Channel, are dredged out. And they're actually, that's dredge sand is usually used nowadays to the benefit of some New Jersey shore town. The Army Corps has a policy where they'll take sand to one of the town beaches and dump it to rebuild a beach for one of the towns, starting with Seabright or Monmouth, you name it. There's a lot of towns. Somebody's going to benefit from the sand that is washed up here. That's why it's growing.
Yeah, it's a work in progress. So we're surrounded here by Fort Hancock.
Yes.
Buildings of Fort Hancock are all over here. I'm sure we could do a separate episode on Fort Hancock.
How many times are you going to come back and visit?
Many times, I hope. This is a tough question because I'm sure it's hard to boil down into a few sentences, but what is the historical significance of Fort Hancock?
It's an Army fort that will be built during the 1890s. It's not named after somebody named John Hancock, okay? And that's what everybody assumes. A great patriot and, a soldier in the Revolution, but the Army will name this place after a Civil War general. Well known in his lifetime, General Winfield Scott Hancock, considered the hero of Gettysburg, one of the heroes of Gettysburg, and he was so well known, he ran for President of the United States in 1880, and he came that close. It was a very close election, and he came close to being President of the United States, but lost the election. But he was a senior major general after the Civil War. And by having Army soldiers here the year round, living in all these yellow brick buildings that we still see here, they would go over to all the concrete gun batteries that the Army built here to stop enemy ships from coming over the horizon and getting into the harbor to invade us. So people don't know this, but the first big mission of the new United States Army the United States Army is created by our new Congress with our new government in the 1790s, is to defend with forts, permanent forts, all our major harbors. And that's their major mission. And so they spend many years defending against enemies. So they're here in peacetime, and definitely they're here in wartime, and they know how to work the guns because they're trained over and over. And that's what Fort Hancock did. Never attacked, from the time they went into use. And although the place was named 1895, that means they named the fortification. They were building concrete gun batteries here, like the mortar battery. And there was no housing area. There was no yellow brick buildings. And those will be built in 1898, 1899. And U.S. Army artillery soldiers arrive to learn how to load, aim, and fire these newfangled big guns. The artillerists are not really used to these new weapons. So they're here because we're right borderline ready to start the Spanish-American War. Right. So they arrive in March of 1898, and we declare war in Spain and have the war fought that summer in 1898. That's when Fort Hancock goes into use. The soldiers here for a long time, but it all closes in the missile age when they used radar-guided ground-to-air missiles to destroy Russian bombers. That whole system is deactivated in 1974. That's why I, a National Park Ranger, is here talking to you, because this went from being Army to National Park.
Before we wind things down today, if we just talk a little bit about the present day and the accessibility of this lighthouse to people. First of all, when is the lighthouse open? Is there a season for it?
Yeah, right. And let's go with right now, because we've been down to just a few rangers, and we're called interpreter rangers. We interpret the history of the park, and we keep the old keeper's house is now our visitor center. We're using that as our park visitor center. So very shortly, starting on May 17th. We're going to go from 2 days of being open with no lighthouse tours because there's only like 3 of us. But now we've trained new seasonal rangers, and very shortly they're going to be learning a lot about giving lighthouse tours and how to operate. The old Keeper's House is our park visitor center. They're going to learn a lot about operating that, and we're going to go starting May 17th, Friday, to a 4-day schedule. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. We'll have, starting in the morning, the Keeper's House will be open at 12:30 p.m. at the front desk inside the visitor center. We put a sign-up sheet, so if you want to climb with a park ranger or a park volunteer, we have those here too. You sign up for the first tour at 12:30, and the first tour, the climb up, will be 1 p.m. Mm-hmm. Then we do it every half hour for the rest of the afternoon. So every half hour, starting at 1 p.m., the last tour will be 4:30 p.m. Mm-hmm. Because that tour comes down at 5 p.m., and that's when we close the visitor center.
Yeah.
So that will be our schedule, 4-day schedule. And we don't charge for our climbing tours, but we do have a rule for child safety that you have to be at least 48 inches tall to climb. That's 4 feet tall. And a lot of kids can do it at that age. So that's the one rule that you have to keep in mind.
Sure. Yeah, most lighthouses have rules along those lines.
Yeah. And there's not much room at the top. Yeah. When you're standing up there with a volunteer or ranger with 8 people, you are shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah.
So it's 8 people per climb. Mm-hmm. Again, for safety.
Sure.
And there's no elevators, and you use the 1863 spiral staircase, has 95 steps. You get to the top of that, so that you're now on top of the staircase. There is a modern 9-rung ladder, and that's got railings on it. It's all modern. And so it's a total of 104 steps if you're counting the steps.
Okay. Well, I'm going to test them out, I think, in a few minutes here.
Yes, yeah, we'll go over and I'll let you in there.
Again, the last time I did it was 17 years ago, so we'll see how my legs are now compared to then. I have 2 final questions for you, okay? And these are for bonus points.
Okay.
Okay. The first one is, why would you say you've spent your entire career as a park ranger at Sandy Hook?
The number one reason is that the tremendous amount of history you've found here. I'm going on 50 years now, and it's hard for me to grasp that as a historian. That I've blinked my eyes and 50 years have gone by. It doesn't seem to be that long, but it's because I always find something new in the history of Sandy Hook that just keeps me going. I'm hungry to learn more after all these years, and you find it. And secondly, it's kind of like a fantasy. In our lifetime, there were Civil War veterans living. We never got to talk to them. But here at Sandy Hook, I've been able, in the 50 years I was here, I've talked to veterans who were here before World War I. Yeah. And one of them had a terrific memory, and we tape recorded him.
Good.
And he was terrific. He served here 1906 to 1912. Mm-hmm. And the other man was 1909 to about 1914. And they remembered things. And when they spoke, it's like, oh my God, this is better than talking to an old Civil War vet. Yeah. And that's what kept me going, is talking to not only the military veterans, but to the civilian employees. The Army had civilian employees to help run things here. Yeah. Not like modern day. They had a lot more civilians doing everything. But they did have civilian, and some of the civilian employees had families, wives and kids, and it was terrific talking to the children. Every former child or Army brat, as they call themselves, always said, Sandy Hook was like a big playground. When this was an Army post, if you didn't break anything or didn't cause any problems, the Army could care less. Yeah. So you could go anywhere at Fort Hancock or Sandy Hook, and as long as you behaved, this was like our playground. Mm-hmm. They all enjoyed growing up here. Yeah. And it's so great to get many, many stories from them. They were the true living history, to get it right from them. Yeah, yeah.
Well, the Lighthouse is living history too, in a sense. I mean, I know it's not literally alive, but it's it's alive in the sense of having so
Well,
much history attached to it.
Yeah, it's a tangible object that you and I can see, touch. I can unlock the door for you, and we can go in. It's something you could put your hands on. That's why I like that movie with Indiana Jones, with the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
And the evil Nazi scientist, and there's Indiana Jones with like a German bazooka, and he says, "Stop what you're doing!" And the archaeologist, the evil one, he goes up to it and he pats the box, and he says, "You're not going to destroy this. You and I are like me. We love history." And he pats the box and he says, "We are all passing through history. This is history."
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think that's the greatest phrase that's ever been written.
Yeah. Even if he was evil.
Yeah, even though he knew Indiana Jones wasn't going to destroy this very historic object. And you're a historian, I'm a historian. This is history.
That's a really good way to put it. I love that. Well, I just want to add, too, that you are part of the history here, and you always will be. I mean, you're an important figure in this history of this place as well. So I have one final question for you, and I think you may have already answered this, but I just want to give you one more chance if you want to add anything or kind of sum it up. What has been your favorite thing about your work at Sandy Hook Lighthouse?
Just finding out more history about it.
Yeah.
That's all I can say.
Yeah.
Because that adds to everybody's knowledge. I share my knowledge with any visitor, a new staff needs to be trained, and I can't in 2 weeks tell them everything, but I am available for their stay here, which will be for May, June, July, August, and probably even September, because the federal fiscal year ends September 30th. Mm-hmm. And most of the seasonals will be able to stay at least through August and maybe half or most of September. I can, if they have any questions, I'm here to try to answer them for them. Mm-hmm. So again, I have no one favorite place. I love that lighthouse. Visitors often on my tours have, what's your favorite lighthouse? And they laughingly say it that way, because you know what I tell them? I said, this one.
Of course.
This has become my favorite lighthouse.
Yeah.
But there's also some gun batteries here that are favorites of mine. The old visitor center down below was a life-saving station built in 1894. Mm-hmm. I've spent many, many years of my whole adult life there, manning the front desk when that building was our Sandy Hook Visitor Center. I miss it terribly. I have tremendous, great memories of that and Lighthouse, of living here and giving a zillion tours. It's a life well lived as far as I'm concerned, and meeting the old people.
Well, that's great. You know, I enjoy listening to you talk about this so much, and your passion for the place is so apparent. And they've been lucky to have you for 50 years here, really. And visitors have been lucky that you've been here for so long. So Tom Hoffman, historian for the Gateway National Recreation Area, again, thank you so much. It's been great, and certainly we'll stay in touch. I wish I could stay here all day, but we got to go climb the lighthouse.
Yep.
So, Tom, again, thank you. I really appreciate your time today.
Jeremy, thank you. And let's do it again.
To learn more about Sandy Hook Lighthouse, go to nps.gov and navigate to the Gateway National Recreation Area. Having the chance to sit down and talk with Tom Hoffman in person was a real treat. Tom is so dedicated to researching the history of Sandy Hook and sharing it with the public. I congratulate him again for his 50 years at Sandy Hook, and I wish him all the best in the future. Be sure to check out uslhs.org to learn more about the tours, the passport program, preservation grants, and everything the U.S. Lighthouse Society offers. If you're not already, please consider becoming a member. Memberships and donations help to support this podcast. Also, if you listen with Apple Podcasts, please rate and review us. We will be back with a new episode next Sunday. For now, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thanks so much for listening, and keep a good light.